There are certain video games that it's hard to imagine anybody hasn't played. Some are so popular and have become so iconic that they've been ported one way or another to virtually every platform in existence. And sometimes a game will get an extra nudge towards immortality by way of being offered as a pack-in extra with a console. If you owned a European Atari 7800 system back in the day, that console's version of Asteroids will need no introduction. It was a built-in extra on those models, while folks outside Europe had to buy their own copy on cartridge. As far as the game itself is concerned, it's probably famous enough that it barely warrants explanation. Surely everyone knows how to play Asteroids, right? But just in case you have been living in an Amish community under a rock on the far side of a moon in another solar system for the last few decades, the short version is that you control a tiny ship in space and have to shoot down the asteroids around you. Shooting each giant rock splits it into smaller chunks, which have to be dealt with in turn, and occasionally you'll be harassed by an alien saucer that you can shoot down for bonus points. I doubt you needed me to tell you any of that though, because to be blunt, I don't think there's a gamer alive who hasn't picked up some version of Asteroids over the years, even if only in passing. So, what is there to say about the Atari 7800 version that hasn't already been said about the game? Well, more than you might think actually. For one thing, if you remember Asteroids in its original form, it didn't look much like this at all. Where the original arcade machine and more than a few of its home conversions sported simple, flat vector graphics, this one takes a different approach. So, your spaceship, the asteroids themselves and attacking alien saucers all get attractively re-rendered in full colour. The 7800 was capable of some impressive visuals for its time, certainly a step up from the Atari 2600 console that came before it, so it's nice to see the effort was made to make use of the expanded colour set. I personally think this is one of the best looking versions of Asteroids out there. It's had outings on technically superior consoles, which sometimes went the route of adding all sorts of visual bells and whistles, but this Atari port has an interesting look without going overboard. Something about it just feels right. It's elegant in its simplicity, which can also be said about the way it plays. When you've got a winning formula like Asteroids, it's not something that needs to be tinkered with too much, and this version doesn't try to fix anything that isn't broken. I'm a sucker for games that feature inertia-based play mechanics, like Thrust on the ZX Spectrum, Solar Jetman on the NES, or Subterranea on the Sega Genesis, to name a few. But Asteroids is the great granddaddy of them all. Part of the appeal for me lies simply in the way the game gives you two tasks to juggle simultaneously. Blasting giant meteoroids apart is the obvious one, but you've also got to keep your tiny, vulnerable spaceship under control as well, which takes practice. People who play this game tend to fall into two camps. Those who never move from the centre of the screen and simply spin the ship in circles, shooting at asteroids willy-nilly, and those who dare to move about a bit and maybe even use the dreaded warp button when things get hairy. I think the latter is the correct way to play the game, otherwise you're not getting the full Asteroids experience. Trying to kill your ship's forward momentum while avoiding space boulders and lining up your next shot, all at the same time, is a special kind of slippery fun, especially when the game starts to throw more rocks at you after a few rounds, and the pace becomes more frantic as a result. The real challenge of the game lies in keeping track of everything on screen, and how quickly things can change in the heat of the moment. When the screen's full of moving objects, you need to be aware of which ones pose the most pressing threat, and when those alien saucers appear, depending where you are on screen at the time, you might find yourself weighing up whether the juicy points bonus you'll get for shooting them is worth risking one of your precious lives for. You can't rely on that warp button to get you out of trouble either. Making the hyperspace jump from a place of immediate peril might very well put you in the path of an oversized pebble. It's a gamble every time you use it, and that's part of the fun. It's risky, and opportunities to score big or get out of the path of impending doom can be fleeting. All the Atari 7800 version of Asteroids actually adds to the basic time-honoured package is a handful of two-player modes. You can play with a friend in alternating rounds to see who gets the better score, or cooperatively at the same time to clear away all those pesky rocks. Or, to up the ante a little, you can play in a competitive simultaneous play mode, where each player's shots can damage the other. I don't care much for the idea of playing against a friend just to see who gets the higher score, but the other two modes are still good fun, and successfully add something without feeling like desperately contrived extra features. It's actually pretty easy to see why this game was chosen as a built-in extra for those European consoles. I mean, imagine unpacking one on the day you got it, and having these play modes ready to go right out of the box. It makes for quite a bundle of good, clean, rock-blasting fun. The question I always ask of retro games in these reviews is whether they're still fun to play today. And in this case, Asteroids on the Atari 7800 represents an excellent version of a true classic, which dares to do some new things without subverting what makes the original work. Like a lot of games from the early era of arcade classics, it's not something I can imagine anyone playing for hours on end in a single sitting, but it's surprisingly addictive and certainly a version of the game that's worth returning to. Just remember, in space, no one can hear you fail.